Hello everyone, and welcome to this video. I hope you're all doing well today and are ready to learn something new about God. And so this video is for the class Principles and Practice of Teaching the Bible. And today I'm going to teach about a passage in 1 John. So I would just like to open up in a word of prayer before I start teaching. So dear God, I just thank you for this day, and I thank you for who you are, and I thank you that we can have this time to learn more about you. I pray that you just open the hearts and minds of the people listening to hear what you want to teach us today, and we just love you and praise you, and we just want to give you glory through this time. And in Jesus' name, amen. All right, so today the passage that I chose to teach on is 1 John 3:16 through 18. So before I go into that passage, I would just like to take a second to kind of see who he's writing to, kind of what's going on here. So the book of 1 John was written by John the Apostle. He does not give the audience that he was writing to in this book, but just through looking at some of the themes in this book, we can see that he is writing to believers. So he does have a specific purpose for writing this book, though. And I actually have a quote from the book, The Essence of the New Testament, a Survey, by Townsend Gutierrez, that kind of outlines the reasoning for which John is writing this book. So this quote says, John writes this epistle to assure believers of their position as children of God and to call illegitimate children and their teachings into question. So just from reading that, we can kind of see that there might have been some heretical teachings and doctrines kind of floating around that maybe some of these believers have picked up, or they may be unsure about their faith or questioning. Just kind of that's going on here. And so John's writing to clear up these misconceptions and remind the believers of who their God is, what the gospel is, and really what they believe. So that is what he is doing here. So I'm going to start out by just reading the full passage of 1 John 3:16 through 18, and then we'll kind of split it apart a little bit and see what's going on in each verse. So 1 John 3:16 through 18 is, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. So as we read that passage, we can just kind of see that this theme going on here is love, and how love kind of correlates with our actions and with what we do. So that's definitely the theme, and this theme actually begins a little bit earlier than the passage I just read. So if we actually look at 1 John 3:10, we can see that this theme kind of starts right there. So I'll read this verse to you also. So this is how we know who the children of God are and who the children of the devil are. Anyone who does not do what is right is not God's child, nor is anyone who does not love their brother or sister. So here we also see this love kind of also correlates with our actions here. And this is kind of just where it starts out. So that is definitely the theme going on. And so I'm going to just start off by reading the first verse of our passage again and just kind of seeing what's going on there. I'll just read the first half of verse 16 and then just kind of talk about that for a little bit. So the first half of verse 16 is, this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. Just that in itself is quite the statement. Through Christ and his life being given up for us, we can understand truly what love is. So although we would normally, if we read this verse, right away the first thing that comes to my mind is Jesus' death on the cross. And I think that's the normal thought when we think of Jesus laying his life down for us. We will normally think of his death, the cross, his sacrifice, all of that. But something else I would like to consider here is that Jesus Christ not only gave up his life for us through his death on the cross, but he also gave it up through his everyday life, through his actions, through the way he talked to his disciples and to other people, and just through all of that, through the way he loved on people, through the way he welcomed little children and women and spoke with Gentiles and slaves and outcasts. He was the one who would go to the people who were far away from everyone else, who were considered unworthy and unholy, and those were the people he went to and served. So it was not only in his death that Jesus gave up his life, it was actually through the life he lived. So just looking at that is something really important to consider here, especially as we look at the next part of this verse. So I'm going to read the second half of verse 16. So this says, "And we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters." So when we look at that, also the first thing we normally would think of is laying down our lives physically, as in death. But as we just looked at with Jesus' life, he did not only give up his life through dying, but he also gave up his life through just the way he lived. So just looking at that, we can also see that we as a people, as believers of God, we also can give up our lives, not through necessarily dying for a brother or sister, but through our actions and our everyday living and the way we love people and all of that. We may have a chance sometime in our life that we actually could offer our physical lives up for our brothers or sisters, but most of the time here in America, we don't really come to that. There's never a point where we would necessarily have to do that. So if we just look at it this other way, that we can also just give up our lives for other people through just the way we live. So that is definitely something to just consider here. And actually, I would like to give a verse for Jesus and the way he gave up his life for us while he was alive, not necessarily through his death. So in Philippians 2:7, we read that Jesus made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. So even just in him coming to earth as a human, like just in that, he was really giving up his life for us, from coming down from heaven and being made in our likeness, so that his sacrifice would be sufficient for us. So that is really what he did, and it's truly amazing that he would do something like that for us. So this theme of love and how love connects with action definitely just makes its way throughout this passage and develops as we read through verses 16 through 18. So it starts out with Jesus and how he gave himself for us and gave his life for us, and how that shows love. That is what true love is. And it moves kind of down through the passage, starting with Jesus, and then focuses now on our lives as believers and how we can show the love of God through our actions and through what we do. So that is kind of how the theme develops there. So we also can see the application of this verse from just directly reading the verse. It kind of just gives an application here in verse 17, where John says, "If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person?" So here we see that the love of God should translate into the way we give, maybe even our material possessions and the things we have and the things we spent our money on that other people may be in need of. So really here, if we just think about this for a second, that the love of God, if that truly is in a person, if the Holy Spirit truly resides in that person and just lives inside of that person's heart, it really should, you really should be able to see that and see the evidence of that in someone's everyday life. If Jesus, being the creator and being completely eternal and knowing everything, if he himself could be made in the form of a human and could give his life for us, how much more should we be able to, as fellow human beings, be able to give our lives for other believers or other people who are in need? So if that love of Christ is living within us, it should be easy for us to give of our possessions and to love the way he loved. So that's definitely an application there. And just to give a personal example for application, I would just like to bring up my mom and a situation that happened with her pretty recently. So she has a friend named Lark, and this friend over the summer lost her house, and she also lost her job a few weeks later. So she was really just not in a good place, was just struggling financially, struggling with thinking of where she would go, where she would live, like what she would even be able to do. And my mom, she just completely just showed the love of Christ to this woman and her son and asked them to come live at our house for just a few months so they could get back on their feet and get a house. She could get a job and get everything back together. So my mom sacrificed so much of her time. I just watched her sacrifice her time, her just everything, her actions. She would clean and cook and get all these groceries and just constantly do all of this stuff to just show the love of God to this family. And I could see that it was a struggle sometimes, and sometimes it was hard and it wasn't fun necessarily, but she chose to do that. And she really did show Christ's love through that. So this friend of hers now does have a house, does have a job, and is back on her feet. But that is how we are to be as children of God. Whatever it takes, we are supposed to give of ourselves to show that love of Christ and to live out our faith. So this whole thought is kind of reiterated in this last verse here. In verse 18 it says, "Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth." So here John is kind of just reiterating that we can't do all of this just through the way we talk. This has to be actually real in our lives. So we can actually think of this for us today too, that we can't claim to love God on social media, and we can't write on Facebook about how much we love him and how much we want to serve him if we're not actually living that out in our lives. That does not count as showing God's love if it is not sincere and from our hearts and actually evidenced through the lives we live and the things we do. So from this passage, I think we just need to really just take away that if Jesus Christ could come and live a life of sacrifice and die and give himself for us, how much more should we be able to do that with him as our example? And if he's living inside of us, nothing should be able to stop us from doing that for fellow believers and whoever else is in need. So I hope that you really enjoyed learning about this passage and that you can take something away from this to keep for the rest of your life. So thank you for listening.